The wolf gave Vasilisa another suspicious look, but restrained his anger and simply sighed.
Right, having received all items received by Nemolyaka.
He paused for a moment, looking at the disfigured man.
By Kirpati and Hetman Uragan.
Staring with glazed eyes at the piece of paper, Vasilisa wrote down what was being dictated to him. When he had finished, he wrote Vasilis at the bottom, instead of his usual signature, and handed the document to the wolf. The wolf took the sheet of paper and examined it. Just then there was a distant crash as the glass doors at the top of the staircase banged shut, followed by the sound of footsteps and Myshlaevsky's booming voice. The expression on the wolf's face darkened immediately. His colleagues started shifting about. The wolf's face turned red, and he hissed at everyone to keep quiet. He drew his Browning out of his pocket and pointed it at Vasilisa, who gave a pathetic grin. Then they heard the bolt, latch, and chain on the door being slammed shut. This was followed by more footsteps and the sound of men laughing. Then the glass door banged shut again, followed by the sound of receding footsteps, and everything went quiet. The disfigured man went out into the hallway, put his ear to the door, and listened. On his return, he exchanged meaningful glances with the wolf, and all three of them went out into the hallway, keeping close to each other. Once in the hallway, the giant wiggled his toes in his tight boots and said,
"It's going to be cold."
He put on Vasilisa's galoshes. The wolf turned to Vasilisa and said softly, his eyes darting around,
"Right, my friend, not a word about any of this. If you tell anybody we were here, our lads will come and give you a good going over. Stay here, in the apartment, until tomorrow morning, or there'll be trouble."
"We're sorry,"
whined the man with the broken nose. The ruddy-cheeked giant said nothing, but simply looked timidly at Vasilisa, glancing happily with one eye at his gleaming galoshes. They went quickly out of Vasilisa's apartment, jostling each other as they tiptoed along the passageway to the outside door. With a rattle of bolts, the door opened to reveal the dark sky outside. Then Vasilisa closed the bolts again, his hands numb from cold. His head was spinning, and for a moment everything seemed like a dream. His heartbeat slowed and then started to race. Vanda was in the hallway, sobbing. She slumped down onto the trunk, banging her head against the wall, large tears rolling down her face.
"Oh, my God! What was all that about? My God, oh my God, Vasha, in broad daylight, what was going on?"
Vasilisa stood in front of her, shaking like a leaf, his face distorted.
"Vasha!" Vanda shouted. "They weren't from headquarters or the Cossacks at all, were they? Vasha! They were just a bunch of thieves."
"Yes, I know," Vasilisa muttered, his arms flung wide in despair.
"My God!"
Vanda continued in the same vein.
"We've got to go this minute, this instant, and report what's happened, so they can be arrested. All our things, all of them. Why didn't someone...
She started shaking and slid down from the trunk onto the floor, burying her face in her hands. Her hair was dishevelled, and her blouse had become unbuttoned at the back.
"Yes, but go where?" Vasilisa asked. "Where do you think? To army headquarters and the city authorities, of course, to report what's happened, as quickly as possible. What's happened to us?"
Vasilisa stood still for a moment, and then made a dash for the door. He flew up the stairs and started hammering at the glass door. Everyone, apart from Chervinsky and Yelena, crowded into Vasilisa's apartment. Lariosik, his face white, stood in the doorway. Myshlaevsky stood with his legs apart, looking at the down-at-heel shoes and rags abandoned by the mysterious visitors. "Your things have gone for good," he said, turning to Vasilisa. "They were just a bunch of thieves. You should thank God you're still alive. To tell you the truth, I'm astonished you got off so lightly."
"My God, look what they've done to us!"
Vanda exclaimed.
"They threatened to kill me."
"Just be thankful they didn't carry out their threat. It's the first time I've seen anything like it."
"Yes, very neatly done," Karas agreed quietly. So what should I do now? Vasilisa asked, his voice faltering. Go somewhere and complain? But where, Viktor Viktorovich? Tell me what to do, for God's sake.
Myshlaevsky grunted and thought for a moment. I advise you not to go anywhere, he said. In the first place, they'll never be caught. That's the first thing. He continued, holding up his long finger. In the second place...
But, Vasya, you remember they said they'd kill you if you told the authorities, don't you?
No, that's rubbish, said Myshlaevsky, frowning. Nobody's going to kill you. But the point is they won't be caught, and nobody's going to try and catch them. And in the second place... He held up a second finger. You'll have to report what it was they took from you. Pre-revolutionary money, wasn't it? Well, if that's what you tell them at headquarters or wherever, they'll possibly come round and search your apartment a second time. Yes, that's very possible, confirmed Nikolka, as the leading search specialist among them. Vasilisa, dishevelled, drenched by the water that had been poured over him to revive him, hung his head, while Vanda quietly burst into tears and leant back against the lintel. Everyone felt sorry for them. Lariosik stood by the doorway, sighing deeply and rolling his glazed eyes. So that's it. We all have our particular grief to bear, he whispered. What weapons did they have? Asked Nikolka.
My God, 2 of them had revolvers, and the third... Vasya, did the third have anything with him?
There were just 2 of them with revolvers, Vasilisa repeated dully. What kind of revolvers? Did you notice? Inquired Nikolka in a businesslike tone. How should I know? Sighed Vasilisa. I'm not an expert in such things. One was large and black, and the other was small and black, on a chain.
Yes, a chain,
Vanda confirmed with a sigh. Nikolka frowned and looked at Vasilisa, cocking his head to one side like a bird. He stood still for a moment. Then he stirred uneasily and made quickly for the door. Lariosik dragged himself after him, but before he could reach the dining room, he heard the sound of breaking glass coming from Nikolka's room, followed by a howl from Nikolka himself. Lariosik dashed into the brightly lit room. A blast of cold air was coming from the open upper window pane, as well as from the huge gaping hole that Nikolka had made with his knees as he had jumped down from the windowsill in despair. His eyes had a wild look. No, it can't be, Lariosik shouted, waving his arms in the air. Pure witchcraft! Nikolka rushed out of the room, through the library, and into the kitchen, where the dumbfounded Anyuta shouted at him as he sped by.
Nikol! Hey, Nikol, where are you going without your hat? Lord, what's happened now?
But he dashed on through the porch and out into the yard. Crossing herself, Anyuta put the porch door on the latch, ran back into the kitchen, and glued herself to the window. But Nikolka had instantly disappeared from sight. He turned sharply to his left, ran down for a bit, and stopped by the snowdrift blocking the entrance to the gap between the 2 houses. The snowdrift was totally free of footprints or any marks. I don't understand, Nikolka muttered to himself in despair, and plunged unhesitatingly into the snowdrift. He felt he would suffocate. After a long time battling and scraping his way through the snow, spitting and snorting, he finally broke through the barrier. Covered in snow from head to toe, he clambered out into the narrow, desolate gap between the walls. When he looked up, he could see the brightly lit window, the fateful window belonging to his room, the black tips of the spikes, and the sharp shadows they cast onto the wall. But no tin. In the faint hope that the rope might have snapped, Nikolka fell to his knees again and again, rummaging around in the rubble. But there was still no tin. Suddenly, it was as if a bright light came on in his head. Aha! He cried, and crawled on farther towards the fence between the gap and the street. When he reached the fence, he felt around with his fingers, causing the planks to separate, and forming a dark hole gaping out onto the street. Now he understood. Yes, that was it. They had removed several planks in the fence, got through into the gap, and had even tried to climb into Vasilisa's apartment through his larder, but they had found a grill over the window. Still covered in snow, Nikolka returned to the kitchen without saying a word. Lord, exclaimed Anyuta, let me at least brush the snow off you. Just leave me alone, for God's sake, answered Nikolka, and went through into the rest of the apartment, rubbing his numb hands on his trousers. Larian, just hit me, will you? He said. Larian blinked and rolled his eyes. What is it, Nikolasha? He said. Why are you in such a state? He timidly began to run his hands up and down Nikolka's back, brushing the snow off with his sleeve. Leaving aside the fact that Alyosha will rip my head off, if, that is, as I pray to God, he recovers, continued Nikolka, the most important thing is Nai-Turz's pistol. It would be better if I'd been killed, for heaven's sake. This is God's punishment for making fun of Vasilisa. I feel sorry for Vasilisa, but don't you see? That was the pistol they used on him, although it would have been easy enough to rob him without the help of any revolver. That's the sort of person he is. My God, what a business. Larian, get some paper. We need to seal up the window. That night, Nikolka, Myshlaevsky, and Lariosik climbed up out of the gap with nails, an axe, and a hammer, and boarded up the fence with a number of short planks. Nikolka himself drove the long, thick nails into the planks with such furious energy that their sharp points emerged on the other side. A little later, the three of them went out onto the veranda with candles and climbed up through the cold storeroom into the attic. Once up there, above their apartment, they crashed and clambered about everywhere, bending down between the warm pipes and the washing, and blocked up the dormer window. When he learnt about the goings-on in the attic, Vasilisa started showing the keenest interest in their actions, and joined them as they clambered about between the rafters, expressing his approval of everything that Myshlaevsky was doing. "What a pity you couldn't have warned us," said Nikolka, his candle dripping wax. "You could have sent Vanda Mikhailovna to us by the back entrance." "I don't think so, my friend," replied Myshlaevsky. "Once they were in the apartment, things were pretty desperate. Do you imagine they wouldn't have defended themselves if attacked? Of course they would. You'd have had a bullet in your belly before you'd got into the apartment, and there you'd be, a dead man, yes, dead. But letting them in the apartment in the first place, that's a different matter." "But they threatened to shoot us through the door, Viktor Viktorovich," Vasilisa said in an impassioned voice. "They would never have fired," Myshlaevsky replied, hammering away. "Not under any circumstances. Shooting would have attracted the attention of the whole street." Later on that night, Karas was to be found luxuriating in the Lisovich's apartment, like Louis XIV. This had been preceded by the following conversation. "But they won't come back tonight, for heaven's sake," Myshlaevsky had said. No, please, we beg you," Vanda and Vasilisa had said on the staircase, interrupting each other. "Please, we implore you, either you or Fyodor Nikolaevich. It wouldn't cost you anything. Vanda Mikhailovna will bring us all tea. We'll make you up a comfortable bed. We beg you, tonight, and tomorrow as well. We must have another man with us in the apartment." "I won't sleep at all otherwise," agreed Vanda, wrapping herself in her Angora shawl. "I've got some brandy. That will keep us warm," said Vasilisa in an unexpectedly jaunty tone. "Go on, Karas, you go," said Myshlaevsky. So Karas was now having a fine old time. As might be expected, the brains and vegetable oil soup had been merely the outward symptoms of the loathsome disease of miserliness with which Vasilisa had infected his wife. Yet in actual fact, delights known only to Vanda lay hidden in the depths of the apartment. On the dining-room table appeared a jar of pickled mushrooms, slices of veal, cherry jam, and a genuine first-class bottle of Shustov's brandy with a bell on the label. Karas poured out a glass for Vanda Mikhailovna. "Not a full glass," Vanda cried. Giving in to Karas with a despairing gesture, Vasilisa also drank a glass. "Don't forget, Vasya, it's not good for you," Vanda tenderly pointed out. Following Karas's authoritative pronouncement that brandy couldn't possibly harm anyone, and that it was even given with milk to anemics, Vasilisa drank a second glass. A blush appeared on his cheeks and sweat on his brow. After 5 glasses, Karas was in an exceptionally good mood. "Feed her up a bit and she wouldn't be at all bad," he thought, looking at Vanda. Then Karas praised the layout of the Lisovich's apartment and started discussing the possibility of an alarm system that connected with the Turbins' apartment. 1 ring would mean the kitchen, 2 the hallway. Anything at all, and the alarm would ring upstairs. And then there you are. It would be Myshlaevsky going to the door. Now that would be quite a different matter. And Karas continued to extol the apartment's virtues, pointing out how comfortable and well-furnished it was. Just one thing, however. It was cold. That night, Vasilisa himself brought in some logs and stoked up the stove in the sitting room. Undressing, Karas lay down on the ottoman between two luxurious sheets, feeling very comfortable and contented. Then Vasilisa appeared in his shirt and braces, sat down in the chair, and said, "You know, I can't seem to sleep. Would you mind if we chatted for a bit?" The stove started to burn low. The rotund figure of Vasilisa, now much calmer, sat in the chair, sighing the whole time as he talked. "Just think, Fyodor Nikolaevich, in the course of a single evening, everything that I have earned with the sweat of my brow has disappeared into the pockets of those scoundrels, taken from me by force. But don't think I don't agree with the revolution. No, not at all. I perfectly understand the historical reasons that brought it about." The crimson light from the fire played on Vasilisa's face and on the buckles of his braces. Karas lay there, feeling magnificently relaxed from the brandy, and began to doze off, trying to maintain an expression of polite interest on his face. "But you do agree with me, don't you, that here in Russia, this admittedly most backward of countries, the revolution has already degenerated into chaotic anarchy? Look at what's been happening. In the course of just 2 years, we have been deprived of any legal protection, of even our minimal human and civil rights. The English say—"
"Ah, yes, the English. They, of course—" Karas mumbled, feeling as if a cushioned wall was beginning to separate him from Vasilisa.
"But in this country, a man's home as his castle is totally meaningless. If in your own apartment, with all doors and windows locked and bolted, no one can guarantee that people such as that gang of crooks who are here this evening will not come in and take all that you possess, and maybe even your life."
"We'll put alarms on your shutters as well," Karas said sleepily, and not entirely convincingly.
"But surely, Fyodor Nikolaevich, my dear fellow, it's not just a question of an alarm system. No alarm system can put a stop to the corruption and decadence that is now infecting the hearts of human beings. All right, an alarm system has particular benefits, but what if it goes wrong?"
"Then we'll mend it," Karas replied, feeling immensely happy.
"But surely you can't build your entire life on an alarm system and those revolvers of yours? That's missing the point. I'm speaking now in general terms. I'm generalizing, so to speak, from a specific instance. The point is that the most important thing has been lost. Respect for property. And once that's happened, then everything's finished. If that's the case, then we're all dead. I'm instinctively a Democrat, one of the people. My father was a simple foreman on the railway. I've earned everything you see here, everything that bunch of thieves took away with them. It's all been my handiwork, no one else's. And believe me, I have never stood on guard defending the old regime. On the contrary, let me tell you a secret. I am a constitutional Democrat. But when I see with my own eyes the way everything is going, I become more and more angry and more convinced that only one thing can save us."
Karas, wrapped in his soft, cushioned little world, was aware of the voice sinking to a whisper.
"Autocracy. Yes, sir. The most rigorous dictatorship that it is possible to imagine. Autocracy."
"Goodness, listen to him going on," Karas thought blissfully. Yes, autocracy. That's complicated. He said, speaking through cotton wool.
"Blah, blah, blah, habeas corpus, blah, blah, blah," the voice droned on through the layer of cotton wool. "Blah, blah, they're wrong if they think, and when they maintain that such a state of affairs can carry on for many years. No, it won't survive for long, and it would be laughable to think that—" "Long live Fort Ivangorod!"
Vasilisa was suddenly interrupted by the voice of one of Karas's former commanders, now dead. "And long live Erdogan and Kars," Karas responded through the mist. And through the mist came the sound of Vasilisa's polite, watery laughter. "Long may they live," sang the jubilant voices in Karas's head.
Chapter 16. Long may he live, long may he live, sang the 9 basses in Tomaszewski's famous choir. Long, echoed the crystal voices of the descants, and the voice of the soprano soared up to the very dome of the cathedral. Look, it's Petlura himself. Look, Ivan. Now, you idiot, Petlura's already outside in the square. In the choir lofts, hundreds of heads crowded together, shoving and pushing each other, hanging down over the balustrade between the ancient pillars adorned with dark-coloured frescoes. Excitedly pushing their way forward towards the balustrade, jostling and crushing each other, people were trying to look down into the depths of the cathedral, but their progress was barred by 3 lines of densely packed heads like rows of yellow apples. Down there, in the airless depths of the cathedral, 1,000 heads rocked and swayed backwards and forwards like a wave, while just above them floated a haze of sweat, steam, and incense, together with the lamp-black from hundreds of candles and from the heavy chained icon lamps. The massive grey-blue curtain creaked as it was drawn along the rails, hiding the central doors of the iconostasis made from fretted, twisting, age-old metal that was as dark and as gloomy as the rest of St. Sophia Cathedral. Tongues of flames from the candles in the chandeliers spluttered and swayed as the threads of smoke drifted upwards. They were running out of air. In the side chapel by the altar there was an unbelievable commotion. Gold chasubles and fluttering stoles were pouring out of the side altar doors and along the worn granite slabs. Violet-coloured headdresses were emerging from round cardboard boxes, and banners were swaying from side to side as they were being taken down from the walls. From somewhere in the depths of the building, the fearsome bass of Archdeacon Serebriakov was roaring away. A headless, armless, hunched chasuble hovered for a moment above the crowd, and then plunged down into it. One sleeve of a quilted cassock rose into the air, followed by the other. People were waving check handkerchiefs and knotting them into plaits.
"Father Arkady, you need to cover your cheeks more. There's a very fierce frost outside. Come on, let me help you."
The banners dipped as they passed under the doorway, as if belonging to a defeated army. Brown faces and mysterious golden words floated along, fringes scraping the ground. "Make way!"
"Goodness, where are they going?"
"Manka, watch out, you'll be crushed!" "What's all this about?" in a bass whisper. "The Ukrainian People's Republic?"
"God knows."
Again in a whisper.
"Anybody not a priest will be some bigwig or other."
"Look out!" "Long may he live!" The voices of the choir rang out once more, filling the entire cathedral. The corpulent, purple-faced Tomaszewski extinguished a greasy wax candle and replaced his tuning fork in his pocket. The main body of the choir, wearing brown, gold-braided surplices down to their ankles, the swaying boy trebles with their blonde hair, so blonde it almost made them look as if they were bald, and the equine heads of the basses, Adam's apples bobbing, streamed down from the dark, gloomy choir lofts. An avalanche of people gushed noisily down the steps, like water down a drain, the crowd getting thicker and thicker, pushing and shoving each other along. Surplices emerged from the side chapel, their owners' faces bandaged as if they were suffering from toothache, their eyes looking anxious beneath their mauve, toy-like headgear. The small, frail figure of Father Arkady, the cathedral dean, wearing his mitre sparkling with semi-precious stones above his grey-checked scarf, floated along in the stream of people. His eyes had a look of despair, and his sparse little beard was quivering. "There's going to be a procession round the cathedral. Get a move on, Mitka."
"Shh! Where do you think you're going? You're getting in the priest's way."
"So what? Serves them right."
"These Orthodox, I ask you. A child's been crushed to death."
"I don't understand a thing."
"If you don't understand anything, then you should go home. You shouldn't be here at all."
"Someone's taken my purse."
"Of course, what do you expect? They're all socialists. Isn't that what I've been saying all along? What have the priests got to do with it?"
"I'm sorry." "Give the priests a bit of money and they'll say a mass for the devil himself."
"Why don't we go to the market right now and smash in some of the Yids shops? Just the right moment to do it."
"I don't speak the same language as you." "A woman is being suffocated. She can't breathe." "Ah!" The crowds swirled out of the colonnaded side areas and down from the choir lofts, step by step, shoulder to shoulder, unable to turn round as they made their way towards the doors. On the ancient frescoes, brown-painted, fat-legged buffoons of uncertain antiquity pranced along the walls playing their pipes. The crowds, half suffocated, half intoxicated by carbon dioxide, smoke, and incense, streamed towards all the doors in a cacophony of sound. The whole time a woman could be heard shrieking in pain. Pickpockets in black mufflers worked through the crowd, efficiently and skillfully slipping their virtuoso hands in between the compacted lumps of human flesh. The crowd swished and rustled along, their feet scraping on the stone slabs. "Oh, my God! Jesus Christ! Holy Mother of God! I'm sorry I came. What's going on, anyway?" "I hope you get crushed, you pig." "My watch! My silver watch! Please, dear brothers and sisters, I only bought it yesterday." "Looks like they've said their last mass here."
What language was the service in, for goodness sake? Didn't understand a word.
"God's language, Grandma. The use of Moscow Russian is strictly forbidden."
What's that? What are you saying? That we can't use our own orthodox language any more?
"Someone's pulled her earrings off, tearing away half her ear." "Cossacks, stop that man! He's a Bolshevik spy!" "This isn't Russia any longer, my good man."
Look over there, those tassels. Look, Marussia, those soldiers with the braided caps. I'm feeling faint.
"The woman's feeling faint. Everyone's feeling faint, old girl. The whole nation's feeling terrible. Hey, stop pushing like that. You'll poke my eyes out. You've all gone mad, you horrible creatures. Go back to Russia. Get out of the Ukraine."
There ought to be police cordons here, Ivan Ivanovich, like there were for the 1912 celebration. Do you remember? Oh, yes.
"So you want that bloody Nicholas back again, do you? We know, we all know what's going on in that head of yours. Get away from me, for Christ's sake. I'm not touching you."
God, if only we could get out of here now. I need some air.
"I won't make it. I'm going to die." The crowd pushed their way out of the main entrance, spinning and turning, hats flying, people crossing themselves amid a buzz of sound. The religious procession, all in silver and gold, crushed and confused, was streaming out from a second side door where 2 panes of glass had been smashed. Flashes of gold in the black melee of people and vestments. Headdresses and mitres rose into the air. Church banners dipped as they passed under the windows, then straightened up again as they floated on. There was a severe frost. The city was wreathed in smoke. The cathedral square resonated constantly with the sound of thousands of tramping feet. The frosty haze hung in the frozen air, drifting up towards the bell tower. The great St. Sophia bell in the main tower boomed out, trying to drown the terrible howling chaos below. The smaller bells were yelping away, without harmony or form, competing with each other as if Satan himself had climbed up into the bell tower in a surplice and amused himself by adding to the general din. Through the dark lancet windows of the multi-storied bell tower, which had once warned of the imminent arrival of the slit-eyed Tartars, the small bells could be seen thrashing about and howling like fierce dogs on a chain. The frost crunched underfoot and smoked in the air. Souls were softened, primed for repentance, as the black hordes poured across the square. Despite the fierce frost, a group of mendicant friars, their heads either bared like ripe pumpkins or with a sparse covering of orange hair, was already sitting cross-legged along the stone path leading to the great stairwell of the old St. Sophia bell tower and singing in their nasal voices. A group of blind minstrels were tugging at people's heartstrings with a forlorn song about Judgment Day, their tattered peaked caps lying upturned at their feet, ready to receive the greasy banknotes that fell into them like leaves, landing on top of the tattered notes already waiting for them at the bottom of the caps. Oh, when we come to the end of time, that dreadful hour of Judgment Day. Rested, squeaking from the yellow-toothed banduras with their crooked necks, the harrowing, heart-rending sounds drifted up from the hard, frosty ground. "My brothers and sisters, have mercy on me, on my poverty. Give alms for the love of Christ."
You run on, to the square, Fedosey Petrovitch, otherwise we'll be late.
There's going to be an open-air service.
There'll be a procession.
They're going to pray for the victory of the revolutionary Ukrainian People's Army.
But what victory? They've already won, haven't they?
Yes, and they'll win again.
There'll be a campaign. Where to?
To Moscow.
Which Moscow?
The usual one.
They won't manage it.
What did you say?
Say that again. Hey, lads, listen to what this chap's saying.
I didn't say anything. Arrest him! Stop, thief!
You run on, Marussia, through those gates. We shan't get through this way. Petlura's on the square, they say. Let's go and see him.
Petlura's in the cathedral, you idiot.
You're the idiot. He's there, people are saying, on the square, riding a white horse.
Hurrah for Petlura! Long live the People's Republic of Ukraine! Bong, 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 thundered the bells.
Have pity on a poor orphan, good people, brothers and sisters in Christ, on a blind man, on a cripple.
Dressed all in black, a legless man in leather-patched trousers, looking like a broken-backed beetle, was pulling himself along the trampled snow between people's feet. The crippled and deformed, with sores on their knees, blue from the cold, moved among the crowd, their heads shaking as though suffering from a debilitating tic or paralysis. Some, affecting blindness, rolled the whites of their eyes. Heartstrings were tugged as people were reminded of poverty, deceit, despair, and the unending savagery of life on the steppes. Groaning and creaking like unoiled wheels, the lyres of the cursed and condemned howled out their refrain.
Come back, my child, you'll get lost.
Unkempt old women, shivering from the cold, hobbled about on sticks, thrusting out their desiccated parchment-like hands, whining,
Kind, beautiful sir, may God grant you health. Have pity, miss, on an old woman, a poor orphan. My darling, God will take care of you.
Beggar women, people wearing caftans and caps with ear mufflers, peasants in sheepskin caps, rosy-cheeked young girls, retired government officials with little paunches, nimble-footed young boys, Cossacks in army coats, in caps with tassels and crowns of different colours, blue, red, green, magenta, with gold and silver piping, and gold tassels from the fringes of coffin covers. Everyone was streaming into the cathedral square like a dark tide, just as the cathedral doors were disgorging fresh waves of people. Heartened by being in the open air, the procession gathered strength, regrouped and closed ranks, moving off in a tight, orderly line of heads in checked scarves, mitres and headdresses, hatless deacons with long flowing manes of hair, monks in skullcaps, sharp-pointed crosses on gilded poles, banners depicting Christ the Saviour as well as the Virgin Mary and Child, and carved, forged, gold and crimson icons covered in Slavonic lettering. In the form now of a grey cloud with a snake-like belly moving through the city, now of dark brown turbulent rivers of people pouring through the ancient streets, Petlura's innumerable forces were making their way to the cathedral square for the parade. The first to arrive, carving their way through the black river of people with a crash of gleaming cymbals and a blast of trumpets shattering the frost, were the densely packed ranks of the Blue Division. Then, dressed in their blue jackets and in their showy Astrakhan cocked caps with blue tops, came the Galicians. 2 blue and yellow standards, propped between bared sabres, followed immediately behind the massed ranks of the brass band, and, behind the flags, jauntily marching with measured tread on the crystalline snow, came rank upon rank of soldiers, wearing uniforms of a good quality, albeit German, cloth. The 1st Battalion was followed by lines of troops in long black belted cloaks, wearing helmets and parading their bristling bayonets in a dense brown thicket. Then came Cossack rifle regiments in their countless numbers, wearing ragged grey uniforms, followed by battalion after battalion of Haidamach Cossack infantrymen, with the dashing regimental battalion and company commanders prancing along on horseback between each battalion. Confident, triumphant march tunes crashed through the air like gold in the multicoloured river of the parade. The infantry were followed by the cavalry regiments, the men rising and falling in their saddles as they trotted gently along. The eyes of the delighted crowd were dazzled by the sight of the crumpled, battered fur caps, with their blue, green and red tops and gold tassels. The lances, looped onto the cavalrymen's right hands, jigged up and down like needles. In among the cavalrymen, the standards waved cheerfully, and the horses of the commanders and the buglers were impelled forward by the triumphant sound of the music. As round as a ball, the large, jolly figure of Bolbotun rode ahead of his company, offering up his low forehead, gleaming with grease, and his chubby, radiant cheeks to the frost. His chestnut mare, her bloodshot eyes rolling, champing at the bit and dribbling foam, kept rearing up as it tried to shake off the 16-stone weight of the colonel. His curved sabre clattered in its scabbard as he dug gently into her nervous, steep-sided flanks with his spurs. "Our leaders are with us, are one with us, as brothers," sang the brave Haidamaks in chorus as they trotted and bounced along, their colourful cap tassels bobbing. Next to ride past, with its tattered yellow and blue standard fluttering and accompanied by accordions, was the regiment of the dark-skinned, moustached Colonel Kozielyeshka. The colonel was in a bad mood as he lashed out at the rump of his stallion with his whip. He had good reason to be angry. Naitur's rifles had fired at his best platoons that foggy morning on the Brest-Litovsk highway, and the regiment that trotted along was depleted in numbers, and therefore reduced in size. Kozia was followed by the brave cavalrymen of the victorious Black Sea Hetman Mazepa troop. The glorious name of the hetman, the man who had almost defeated Tsar Peter the Great at the Battle of Poltava, was set out in gleaming gold letters on the blue silk standard. The crowds of people pressed against the grey and yellow walls of the houses, surging forward and climbing onto advertisement hoardings. Small boys clambered up lamp-posts, sitting on the crosspieces, standing on rooftops, whistling and cheering. "Hurrah! Hurrah!" people cheered from the pavements. The flat discs of faces peered out in huge numbers from behind balcony doors and windows. Cabbies were standing unsteadily on the boxes of their sleighs, waving their whips in the air. "They said they were just a rabble. Some rabble! Hurrah! Hurrah! Long live Petliura! Glory to our leader! Hurrah! Manya, look, there he is! Petliura himself, on the grey! Look how handsome he is!" "No, madam, you're wrong. That's just a colonel." "Really? So where's Petliura, then?" "He's at the palace, receiving the French emissaries who've come from Odessa." "Don't be idiotic, mister. What emissaries?" "They say Petliura's in Paris, Pyotr Vasilievich. Just imagine that."
That's some rabble for you. There must be millions of them.
"Well, where's Petliura, then? So, my friends, where is he? We only want just one look at him."
"Petliura, madam, is now on the square reviewing the parade." "Nothing of the sort. He's in Berlin being presented to the President on the occasion of the signing of the Federal Agreement." "What President? What do you think you're doing, mister, spreading such provocative rubbish?" "He's being presented to the President in Berlin on the occasion—" "Did you see that? Did you see? Looking so important, going past along Rilsky Alley in a carriage, 6 horses. "But they don't really believe in the Orthodox Church, do they?"
"I'm not saying they do. I'm not saying they don't. I'm saying he rode past, that's all. Look at the facts yourself."
"The fact is that the priests are saying Mass right now."
"He'll be in a stronger position with the priests on his side."
"Petliura! Petliura! Petliura!" Following the 10 cavalry regiments came an endless column of artillery, with the fearsome rumble of heavy wheels and the rattle of limbers. The gun carriages carried large, blunt-snouted mortars, and compact howitzers rolled along. Cheerful, contented gun crews sat on the limbers with triumphant expressions, while the cavalrymen themselves looked calm and sedate. The carriages were pulled by large, big-rumped, well-fed horses 14 hands high, and smaller, hard-working peasant horses looking like pregnant fleas. A troop of light mountain artillery trotted nimbly past, the small cannon bouncing along with their gallant crews.
So there's your so-called 15,000 for you. What lies we were told. 15,000. Bandits. Chaos. And look what we have. Good Lord, you'd never count them all. Another battery. And another. And another.
His bird-like nose thrust into the collar of his student coat, Nikolka felt himself being shoved and pushed around by the crowd, until he finally managed to worm his way into a small niche in the wall, where he was able to stand his ground. The niche was already occupied by a jolly peasant woman in felt boots, who said cheerfully,
You hang on to me, my lad, and I'll hang on to the wall, and we should be all right.
Thanks, Nikolka muttered dejectedly into his frozen collar. I'll hold on to this hook.
But where's Petliura?
The woman babbled on.
Oh, I'd so love to see Petliura. They say he's such a handsome man.
Yes, growled Nikolka indeterminately, muffled in his sheepskin. Such a handsome man. Another gun battery, damn it, he thought. Now I understand.
He was here just now, people say, riding by in a car. Didn't you see him?
He's in Vinitsa, Nikolka pronounced in a dry, sepulchral voice, moving his frozen toes around in his boots. Why the hell didn't I wear my felt boots in such a frost? He thought.
Look, Petliura!
That's not Petliura. That's just the commander of the bodyguard.
Petliura has taken up residence in Belaya Tserkov. That will be the capital now.
So does that mean he won't be coming to the city, may I ask?
He'll come in his own good time.
So that's it. I see. Clang, clang, clang. From St. Sophia Square came the muffled sound of Turkish drums. 4 fearsome-looking armoured cars rolled along the street, swaying from side to side under the weight of their heavy turrets, machine guns poking out threateningly through the slits in their sides. But none of the armoured cars contained the rosy-cheeked, enthusiastic Strashkevich. His cheeks no longer rosy, but a dirty waxen colour. He was now lying quite still at the spot where he had fallen, right by the gates of Marinsky Park in Pyechersk. There was a little hole in his forehead, and another one still caked with blood behind his ear. The enthusiastic lieutenant's bare feet were poking up out of the snow, and his glassy eyes were staring straight up into the sky through the bare branches of a maple tree. Around him, everything was very quiet. There wasn't a soul in the park, and only the occasional person in the street. The sound of the music coming from St. Sophia did not reach as far as the park, and the lieutenant's face was therefore perfectly calm. The armoured cars hooted as they sliced through the crowd of people and rolled off towards where Bogdan Khmelnytsky was sitting, his mace pointing to the northeast, black against the sky. The great bell was still sending oily waves of sound reverberating around the snow-covered hills and city rooftops. The drums were still beating somewhere in the thick of the crowd, and small boys were clambering excitedly up onto the hooves of Black Bogdan's horse. Following the armoured cars, a line of lorries thundered down the street, snow chains clanking, carrying girls wearing brightly coloured skirts under their sheepskin jackets and straw wreaths on their heads, and lads in blue, baggy Ukrainian trousers. They were standing on the running boards, singing quietly but melodiously. Then suddenly, shots rang out on Rilsky Alley. Just before this, screams from some peasant women had whirled around in the crowd. Someone had started running and yelling, "This is so terrible!" Then someone had started shouting, hurriedly, spluttering hoarsely, "I know who these people are! Stop them! They're officers! Officers! I saw their epaulets!" Several men rushed out from one of the platoons of the 10th Rada Company, waiting its turn to join the parade, and burst into the crowd, grabbing hold of someone. Women shrieked. The person they had grabbed, Captain Pleshka, started protesting in a weak, distraught voice. "I'm not an officer. I'm nothing of the sort, not at all. How dare you? I work in a bank." Next to him, they seized someone else, a man with a pale face, who said nothing, but who fought to get free. Then people started dashing down the alleyway, as if from a burst bag, jostling each other. Struck dumb with horror, everybody joined in the rush. Behind them, they left a completely empty space, quite white, except for the black spot of an abandoned cap. Then, in the alleyway, there was a flash and a bang, as Captain Pleshka, who had denied himself thrice, paid for his curiosity towards parades. He lay face down by the small front garden of the St. Sophia Cathedral residence, his arms outstretched. Then the second man to have been caught, the silent one, fell at his feet, his face crashing into the pavement. Immediately, the cymbals waiting on the corner of the square crashed out, the crowd surged back, and the orchestra struck up its thunderous roar once more. "Quick, march!" roared a triumphant voice, and the Rada Cavalry Company marched onto the square, their tassels gleaming. Then, suddenly, quite unexpectedly, in the gap between the cathedral domes, the layer of grey cloud parted, and the sun broke through the mist and gloom. The sun was so large that nobody in the Ukraine had ever seen anything that size before, and it was completely blood-red. As the distant globe fought to pierce through the layer of cloud, it sent streaks of clotted blood and plasma flowing out from its surface. The main dome of St. Sophia became bathed in blood-red sunlight, casting a strange shadow onto the square below, making Bogdan appear violet and the milling crowd even darker, denser, and more confused. And then men in grey coats wearing belts, with ropes and bayonets, were seen climbing up the steep black granite wall on a ladder in an attempt to scrape away the inscription. But it was a hopeless task. The bayonets slipped and slithered away from the granite, and in his fury, Bogdan tore his steed away from the cliff at a gallop, trying to fly away from those people who were clinging onto his hooves and weighing him down. His face, turned directly towards the red globe of the sun, expressed his rage, his mace still pointing into the distance. At that moment, a man was raised high up onto the slippery, icy fountain opposite Bogdan, above the humming, milling crowd of people. The man was wearing a dark coat with a fur collar, but despite the frost, he had removed his cap and was holding it in his hands. The square continued to hum and buzz like an ant-hill, but the bells of St. Sophia had now fallen silent, and the bands had marched off, disappearing down various frosty streets. A huge crowd gathered at the bottom of the fountain. "Hey, Pietka, who's that they've lifted up?" "Looks like Petliura." "Petliura's giving a speech." "What nonsense, that's just any old speaker." "Rossiya, look, a speaker." "He's going to read out a declaration." "No, he's going to read one of the universals." "Long live the free Ukraine!" The man who had been lifted up gave an inspired glance over and above the forest of 1,000 heads towards the place in the sky where the sun's disk had become even more evident, bathing the crosses in a thick red gold. With a wave of his arm, he shouted in a weak voice, "Long live the people!" "Petliura! Petliura!" "What are you talking about? That's not Petliura." "What's Petliura doing up on a fountain?" "Petliura's in Kharkov. Petliura's just gone into the palace for a banquet." "Nonsense, there won't be any banquet." "Long live the people!" repeated the man on the fountain, a lock of blonde hair drooping onto his forehead. "Shh!" The fair-haired man's voice grew stronger, and it was now clearly audible above the racket and crunching of feet, the droning and hum, and the sound of the drums in the distance. "Did you see Petliura?" "Yes, just a moment ago." "Oh, you lucky man. What's he like?" "Black upturned moustache, just like the Kaiser Wilhelm, and in a helmet. There he is, there! Look, Maria Fyodorovna, he's riding past us now, look!" "Why are you talking such provocative nonsense? That's the chief of the fire service." "Petliura's in Belgium, madam." "Why has he gone to Belgium?" "To conclude an agreement with the Allies." "No, that's not it. He's just gone this minute to the Parliament with his escort." "What for?" "For the oath." "He's gone to swear an oath?" "Why would he need to do that? They're going to swear an oath of allegiance to him." "Well, I would rather die," in a whisper, "than swear an oath of allegiance to him." "Well, you won't have to. Women will be left alone." "Yids won't be left alone, that's for certain." "Neither will officers. They'll have their guts ripped from them." "So will the landlords. Down with them all." "Shh!" The fair-haired orator, with a determined expression in his eyes, but also one of unspeakable grief, pointed towards the sun. "Did you hear that, brothers and comrades?" he said. "The Cossacks singing 'Our leaders are with us like brothers, with us, yes, with us.'" And the man took his cap and started striking himself on his chest, sporting an enormous scarlet bow, billowing like a wave. "Our leaders are with the people. They were born of the people, and they will die with them. They froze with them in the snow during the siege of the city. They played their valorous part in the capture of the city, and the red flag is now flying over all the buildings." "Hurrah!" "What red flag? What does he mean? It's yellow and blue." "The Bolsheviks' flag is red." Shh! Hurrah! And his Ukrainian is pretty awful.
Comrades, a new task now awaits you to sustain and strengthen our new independent republic for the benefit of all workers, for those who work in the factories and those who work on the land. Only those who have shed their blood and sweat for our motherland will have the right to possess it.
That's right! Hurrah!
Did you hear? He addressed us as comrades. Wonders will never cease.
Shh, be quiet.
And so, fellow citizens, on the glorious occasion of our people's victory,
the orator said, beginning to use less and less Ukrainian, his eyes shining as he stretched out his hands more and more passionately towards the sky.
Let us swear an oath that we will not lay down our arms until the red flag, the symbol of freedom, is flying above all the workers of the world.
Hurrah! Hurrah! Shut up, Vaska. Have you gone off your head? Sure, what on earth are you thinking of? Keep quiet. But I swear I can't stay silent, damn it, Mikhail Semyonovich.
Arise, ye damned of the earth. The Onegin-like black sideboards disappeared into the thick beaver collar, leaving only his eyes gleaming in the direction of an excited cyclist who had been crushed in the crowd of people. Eyes that were uncannily similar to those of the dead Ensign Spolyansky, who had died on the night of the 14th of December. A hand in a yellow glove reached out and pulled Sture's hand down.
All right, I'll keep quiet, Sture muttered, his eyes boring into the fair-haired man's face.
The speaker had by now fully captured the attention of the people in the front of the crowd.
Long live the Soviets of workers, peasants, and Cossack deputies, he shouted. Long live—
The sun suddenly disappeared, and the cathedral and its domes were cast into shadow. The faces of both Bogdan and the speaker, the lock of blonde hair bouncing up and down on his forehead, were clearly delineated. A gasp went through the crowd.
The Soviets of workers, peasants, and Red Army deputies. Workers of the world unite!
What's that? What did he say?
Hurrah!
At the back of the crowd, a few men, accompanied by one high-pitched, resonant voice, began singing When I Die.
Hurrah! Came a triumphant shout from another part of the crowd.
And then, suddenly, there was a whirlwind of commotion in yet another section of the crowd.
Seize him! Seize him!
Shouted a cracked male voice in an unpleasant whine.
Seize him! It's sheer provocation! He's a Bolshevik! You Russian scum! Get him! You heard what he was saying!
Someone's hands flashed in the air. The speaker leant to one side, then his legs and stomach disappeared, followed by his head, now in a cap.
Seize him!
Piped a thin tenor voice in response to the first.
He's spreading lies! Get him, lads! Get him, everyone!
Huh! Wait! Who's that you've got there? Who is it? That's not the one!
The owner of the high-pitched voice pushed through the crowd to the fountain, waving his arms about as if he were landing a large, slippery fish. But muddle-headed Shure, in his weather-beaten jacket and fur cap, stood in front of him, twisting and turning, and yelling,
"Seize him!" "Hey, stop him!" he suddenly barked. "He's taken my watch!"
A woman in the crowd screamed out as someone kicked her.
"Whose watch? Where? You're lying! You won't get away!"
Someone standing behind the owner of the high-pitched voice grabbed him by the belt and held on to him, while a large, cold fist connected with his nose and lips in a punch of considerable weight.
"Ouch!"
the high-pitched voice yelled, its owner turning deathly pale, sensing that his head was bare and that his hat had disappeared. At that instant, he received a second massive blow to the face, and someone bawled up to the skies,
"I've got him! The thief! The pickpocket! The son of a bitch! Give him what for?"
"What are you doing?"
howled the high-pitched voice.
"Why are you hitting me? It wasn't me! It wasn't me! It's the Bolshevik you need! Ouch!"
he yelled again. "Oh, my God, Marussia, let's get out of here now. What's going on?" In the crowd, right by the fountain, there was a mad scrum of people swirling around. One man was being beaten up, another was howling, and people were scattering everywhere. But the main thing was that the fair-haired orator had disappeared. Somebody was dragged out of the middle of it all, but he turned out to be the wrong man. The orator had had a black cap, whereas this one was wearing a fur cap. And within 3 minutes,
The pandemonium had died down of its own accord, as if it had never existed. A new speaker had been found, who had been lifted up onto the edge of the fountain, and a crowd of people, soon some 2,000 strong, were surging forward from all directions and forming a central nucleus to listen to him. In the snow-covered alleyway by the small front garden, now abandoned by the inquisitive public who had gone off to follow the parade, Sture could contain himself no longer and abruptly sat down on the pavement, roaring with laughter. "Oh, this is incredible!" he roared, clutching at his stomach. He was heaving with convulsive laughter, his white teeth gleaming. "I'll die from laughing, like a hyena. Did you see how hard they were hitting him, for goodness sake?" "Come on, Sture, get a move on," said his companion, the unknown man in a beaver collar, the spitting image of the famous dead ensign and chairman of the Magnetic Triolet Society, Spolyansky. "All right, in a minute," Sture said, starting to get to his feet. "Give me a cigarette, Mikhail Semyonovich," said Sture's other companion, a tall man in a black coat. He had tilted his fur cap onto the back of his head, a lock of fair hair hanging down over his forehead. He was breathing heavily and puffing and panting, as if he were too warm in spite of the frost. "So have you had enough?" the unknown man asked affectionately. He turned back the hem of his coat and, taking out a small gold cigarette case, offered the fair-haired man an untipped German cigarette. The fair-haired man lit up, shielding the light with his hands. It was only when he had exhaled that he gave a sigh of relief. Then all three of them quickly set off and disappeared round the corner. Two figures in student uniforms came hurrying out from the square into the small alleyway. One of them was short in stature, but well-built and neat-looking in shining rubber galoshes. The other was tall, broad-shouldered, his legs like a pair of compasses, with each stride measuring almost 2 yards. Both of them had their collars turned up right to the brims of their peaked caps, and the tall one even had a scarf covering his smooth-shaven mouth, clearly because of the frost. As if obeying a single command, both figures turned their heads to look at the body of Captain Plieshka and the body of the other man lying face downwards, his knees spread out in opposite directions, and then both walked on without saying a word. Then, as the two of them were turning into Zhytomyrskaya Street from Rilsky, the tall one turned to his shorter companion and said in a hoarse tenor voice, "So, did you see that then? I'm asking you, did you see it? I shall never forget it as long as I live," the tall man continued, striding out along the street. "I'll always remember it." The smaller man walked behind him without saying anything. "We need to thank them for teaching us a lesson. If ever I come across that swine, that hetman—" A hiss of derision could be heard coming from behind the scarf. "I'll—" And the tall man delivered himself of a fearsome first-class expletive that seemed to go on forever. When they came out onto Bolshaya Zhytomyrskaya Street, they found their way blocked by the procession that was making its way to the watchtower in the old part of the city. Strictly speaking, the route from the cathedral square was direct and uncomplicated, but Vladimirskaya Street was blocked off by the cavalry squadrons, which had still not been able to disperse after the parade, and so the procession, like everyone else, had to make a diversion. The procession was headed by a group of young boys, running along, leapfrogging and emitting piercing whistles. They were followed by a man in a tattered, unbuttoned coat, without a hat. He was walking on the trampled snow, his eyes rolling with an expression of horror and despondency. His face was covered in blood, and tears were pouring down his cheeks. His wide mouth was open, and he was crying out in a thin, hoarse voice, in a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian. "You have no right to do this. I am a well-known Ukrainian poet. My name is Gorbalas, and I have written an anthology of Ukrainian poetry. I will complain to the chairman of the Rada and to the minister. It is an absolute disgrace, beyond words." "Give him what for, the pickpocketing bastard!" people were shouting from the pavements. Sobbing in despair and looking all around himself, the man shouted, "It was me who tried to detain the Bolshevik provocateur." "What? What's all this? Who's he talking about?" "Someone tried to kill Petlura." "Well, and?" "He shot at our leader, the son of a bitch." "But he's a Ukrainian." "He's not a Ukrainian. He's a swine," a bass voice growled. He's stolen someone's purse."
The boys whistled derisively.
"What are you saying? By what right?"
"They've caught a Bolshevik provocateur. Kill him on the spot, the scum!" The excited crowd crept up behind the poor man. There was a glimpse of a fur cap with a gold-braided tassel and the tips of 2 rifles. One person, a multicolored belt fastened tightly round his waist, started shambling alongside the man covered in blood, mechanically punching him on the neck from time to time whenever he started to cry out particularly loudly. The hapless man, not knowing what to do any more, walked along, every so often breaking into violent but soundless sobbing, and then falling silent again. The 2 students let the procession go by. When it had disappeared, the tall man seized his smaller companion by the arm and started whispering in malicious glee.
"Serves him right. Just what was needed. Well, I'll tell you one thing, Karas. The Bolsheviks are brilliant. I mean it, absolutely brilliant. That's the way to do things. Did you see how neatly they managed to spirit that speaker away? And they're bold operators. I admire them for that, for their boldness, damn them." But the smaller man simply answered quietly, "If we don't get a drink this minute, I'll hang myself." "That's an idea, a great idea," responded the tall man enthusiastically. "How much money have you got?" 200. "And I've got 150. Let's go to Tamara's and get a couple of bottles." "It's closed." "She'll open up for us." The 2 of them turned onto Vladimirskaya Street and walked on until they came to a 2-storied house with a sign saying groceries. Next to it was another sign, Cellar, Tamara's Castle. They dived down some steps and began knocking cautiously on the glass double door. Chapter 17. Throughout the last 3 days, during which events had crashed down on his family like rocks, Nikolka had had one cherished aim in life, an aim connected with the mysterious final words uttered by the man stretched out in the snow. This aim he had now achieved, but in order for it to be realized, he had had to dash about the city before the start of the parade, visiting no fewer than 9 addresses. And although while he was rushing about, he lost heart in the whole enterprise many, many times, each time he picked himself up and carried on, finally achieving what he had set out to do. In a small house on the very edge of the city, on Litovskaya Street, he managed to locate someone who had served in the 2nd company of their detachment, and to find out Naitur's address, first name, and patronymic. For 2 hours, Nikolka tried to battle his way through the stormy waves of people in an attempt to get across St. Sophia Square. But it had proved quite impossible to cross the square, out of the question. So the frozen Nikolka had spent about another half-hour freeing himself from the claws of the crowd in order to return to his starting point, Mikhailovsky Monastery. Then he had the plan of going down Kostelnaya Street, after which, with a big detour, he could carry on down to the Khreshchatyk, and from there make his way onto Maloprovalnya Street, along the low-lying back alleyways. But that turned out to be impossible as well. As with everywhere in the city, dense columns of troops were snaking up Kostelnaya Street on their way to join the parade. So he took an even longer and more circuitous route, and found himself totally alone on Vladimir Hill. He ran along the park terraces and avenues, making his way between the walls of white snow, finding himself at times in sections of the park where the snow wasn't so deep. From the terraces, he could look across the ocean of snow to the Imperial Park on the opposite hills, and then farther to the left to the unending Chernigov plains, stretching away in utter winter stillness beyond the Dnieper, lying white and proud in its icy banks. Everything was utterly peaceful and still, but at that moment Nikolka had no time for peace or stillness. Fighting his way through the snow, he climbed up one terrace after another, occasionally noting with some astonishment that here and there were tracks in the snow. People clearly ventured onto the hill, even in the middle of winter. Finally, he was able to make his way down an avenue where, with a sigh of relief, he saw that there were no troops on the Khreshchatyk, and he made straight for the cherished spot, number 21 Maloprovalnaya Street. This was the address he was looking for, an unwritten address that had become firmly lodged in his brain. Nikolka felt both excited and shy. Who shall I ask, and how best to put it? I'm in the dark here. He rang the doorbell of an annex nestling at the bottom of a garden terrace. For a long time, nobody came to the door, but finally he could hear the sound of shuffling footsteps, and the door was opened a fraction on a chain. A woman's face in a pince-nez peered round the door.
"What is it?"
she asked abruptly from the gloom of the hallway. "Can you tell me, please, does the Naitours family live here?" The woman's face adopted a completely unwelcoming expression, and her pince-nez glittered at him hostilely.
"There's nobody called Tours here," she said in a low voice.
Nikolka blushed. He felt embarrassed and sad. "This is apartment number 5.
"Well, yes," the woman answered reluctantly and suspiciously. "Tell me what it is you want."
"I was told that the Tours family lives here." More of the woman's face emerged from behind the door as she took a quick glance around the garden to see if there was anybody with Nikolka. She was so close, he could clearly see her full double chin.
"Yes, but tell me what it is you want."
Nikolka sighed and, glancing behind him, said, "I've come here about Felix Felixovich. I have some information about him." The expression on the woman's face changed abruptly.
"And you are?"
"A student."
"Wait here a moment,"
she said, and slammed the door. The footsteps died away. A minute and a half later, the click of heels could be heard as someone approached the door. The door opened wide, and Nikolka was able to go in. The hallway was illuminated with light coming from the sitting room, and Nikolka was able to see the side of a comfortable armchair, and then the woman in the pince-nez. He took off his cap, and suddenly saw another woman standing in front of him. She was small and thin, bearing traces of a faded beauty on her face. Indefinite, insignificant signs, her forehead possibly, or the colour of her hair, gave Nikolka to understand that she was Nye's mother, and he was horrified, wondering how he would be able to break the news. When the woman looked at him steadily, her eyes bright with curiosity, he found himself at even more of a loss. There was someone else standing next to her, a younger woman, also seemingly with Nye's features. "Well then, what is it you have to tell us?" the mother asked insistently. Nikolka clutched at his cap, looked at her and said, I... The thin lady, the mother, gave him an angry, apparently hostile look, and suddenly yelled so loudly that the glass in the door behind him shook. "Felix has been killed!" She clenched her fists, waving them in front of Nikolka's face, and shouted, "He's been killed! Did you hear that, Irina? Felix has been killed!" Nikolka's eyes glazed over with fear. "My God, I haven't even said anything yet," he thought despairingly. The large lady in the pince-nez quickly shut the door behind Nikolka and ran up to the mother, seized her by the shoulders, and whispered, "Shh, Maria Frantsevna, my dear, shh." Then, bending close to Nikolka, she asked, "Perhaps it's not true. Oh, Lord, please tell us, is it really true?" But he was unable to say anything. He simply looked ahead of him in despair, aware once more of the side of the armchair. "Shh, Maria Frantsevna, shh, my dear, they'll hear us, for goodness sake. It is the will of God," the large woman babbled. Naitours' mother collapsed onto the floor on her back, shouting, 4 years, 4 years I've been waiting and waiting." The younger woman, standing behind Nikolka, quickly went over to her mother and helped her up from the floor. Nikolka wanted to help her, but he unaccountably suddenly broke into a fit of sobbing, unable to stop. The curtains had been drawn across the windows, and the room lay in semi-gloom. There was utter silence in the room, pervaded by the unpleasant smell of medicine. Eventually, the silence was broken by the younger woman, clearly Nye's sister. She turned away from the window and went up to Nikolka. He got up from the armchair, still clutching his cap, which he had found impossible to put down in such terrible circumstances. Absent-mindedly smoothing down a lock of her dark hair, Nye's sister asked, her mouth contorted with sorrow,
How did he die?
He died, Nikolka answered, summoning up his most natural voice. He died. I'd like you to know that he died the death of a hero. A real hero. He'd sent away all his cadets in good time at the very last moment, but he himself stayed where he was and covered their retreat with rifle fire. All the time he was telling them this, Nikolka was in tears. We came under machine gun fire, and I was nearly killed as well, he continued, still crying. There were only the two of us left, and he shouted at me, trying to drive me away, firing from his machine gun. The enemy's cavalry was coming at us from every angle. We had fallen into a trap, literally from every angle.
But perhaps he was just wounded.
No, he answered firmly, wiping his eyes, nose, and mouth with a dirty handkerchief. No, he was killed. I was able to feel him. He had been hit in the head and chest. The room became even darker. Maria Frantsevna had fallen silent, and there was no sound coming from the next room. The three of them remained in the sitting room, huddling together and whispering to each other. Nai's sister, Irina, the large lady in the pince-nez, Lydia Pavlovna, Nikolka had learned that she was the landlady of the apartment, and Nikolka himself.
I don't have any money with me, he whispered, but if necessary, I can go and get some straight away, and then we can set off.
I can give you some money immediately, Lydia Pavlovna boomed. The money's not important, but just make sure you're successful. Irina, you mustn't say a word to her about any of this. I really don't know what to do.
I'll go with him, whispered Irina, and we will be successful. Why don't you just tell her that his body is lying in the barracks and that we need permission to see him?
Yes, that's a good idea.
The large lady crept quietly into the next room, where her voice could be heard whispering reassuringly.
Come now, Maria Frantsevna, why don't you lie down for the love of Christ? They're going right now to sort everything out. That cadet said he was lying in some barracks.
What? On bare boards?
She asked in a resonant and still hostile, or so it seemed to Nikolka, voice.
No, Maria Frantsevna. He's in a chapel.
Perhaps he's still lying on those crossroads, with dogs gnawing at his body.
Maria Frantsevna, please don't say such things. Just try to stay calm, I beg you.
Mamma has not been her normal self these last 3 days,
Nai's sister whispered, again smoothing back the lock of hair on her forehead. Her eyes focused on a distant spot, somewhere beyond Nikolka.
But now, everything else has become unimportant. I'm going with them, they heard from the next room.
Nai's sister jumped up and ran through to the next room.
Mamma, you're not going with them. You're not. The cadet will refuse to help us if you go. He could be arrested. Just stay there where you are, I beg you. Oh, Irina, the mother continued. He's been killed. And what are you doing about it? Tell me what? And what will I do now that Felix has been killed? Killed? Lying in the snow? Just think.
And she burst out sobbing again, with the bed creaking beneath her. Then the voice of the landlady could be heard.
Maria Frantsevna, my darling, try to be brave.
Oh, Lord! Oh, my God!
Cried Nai's sister, running quickly through the sitting room. Nikolka sat there, wrapped in horror and despair. What if we don't find him? He thought. What then? Nikolka stopped outside the most horrible doorway of all. Despite the frost, the most terrible foul stench was coming through the doors. Perhaps you should wait here, he said to Irina. There's such a foul smell through there, you'll probably feel ill. Irina looked at the green door, then at Nikolka.
No, she answered. I'm coming with you.
Nikolka pulled the handle of the heavy door, and they went in. At first, everything was completely dark. Then they gradually began to make out endless rows of empty coat hooks, lit dimly by a ceiling lamp. Nikolka turned anxiously to look at his companion, but she seemed to be all right, walking along next to him. It was just that her face was pale, and she was frowning. She was frowning in a way that reminded him of Nai Tur's. The similarity was only passing. Nye had had a straightforward masculine face, as if sculpted in metal, whereas she was a beautiful woman, cast more perhaps in the foreign mould rather than the Russian. An astonishing, extraordinary young woman. The smell, whose effect on Irina Nikolka had so feared, was everywhere. Everything smelled. The floors, the walls, the wooden coat hooks. The stench was so terrible that you could even see it. The walls seemed thick and sticky with grease. The coat hooks were glistening, and everywhere there was the stench of rotting flesh. Although you could very quickly get used to the smell, it was better not to look at anything, or indeed think about anything. That was the most important thing, not to think. Otherwise you would realize what the smell signified. There was a brief glimpse of a medical student in a coat. Then he was gone. Beyond the coat hooks on the left, a door creaked open, and someone in boots emerged. Nikolka looked at him, and then quickly averted his gaze to avoid looking too closely at his jacket. The jacket, as well as the man's hands, were glistening like one of the coat hooks. "What do you want?" the man asked brusquely. "We've come on a matter that... We really need to see the person in charge here," Nikolka said. "We need to find a particular person who's been killed. Could he be here, do you think?" "Who is this person?" the man asked mistrustfully. "He was killed here on a city street 3 days ago." "Ah, I see. A cadet or an officer? Caught by the Cossacks? What was he exactly?" Not wanting to say that Nye Tours was an officer, Nikolka simply said, "Well, yes, he was killed too." "He was an officer, mobilized by the hetman," Irina said, going up to the man. "Nye Tours." Clearly uninterested in who Nye Tours might have been, the man gave Irina a sideways glance and answered her, coughing and spitting on the floor. "I don't really know what I can do. It's past working hours now and there's nobody here. The other janitors have gone home. It will be difficult to find him. Very difficult. The bodies have been taken down to the cellars. Difficult. Very difficult." Irina Nye undid her bag, took out a banknote, and held it out to the janitor. Nikolka turned away, afraid that if the man were honest he would demur. But he accepted the money. "Thank you, miss," said the janitor, clearly much more cheerful now. "We'll be able to find him. We'll just need permission. If the professor agrees, you can pick up the body." "But where is the professor?" Nikolka asked. "He's here, but he's busy. I don't know. Should I tell him you're here?" Yes, please tell him at once," Nikolka said. "I'll be able to recognize the dead man immediately." "I can do that for you," the janitor said, and led them up some steps and into a corridor where the stench was even more unbearable. Then along the corridor, then left into another corridor where the smell was less intense and where it was a little lighter because of the glass ceiling. Here the doors on both sides of the corridor were painted white. The janitor stopped at one of these doors and knocked. Then, removing his cap, he went in. The corridor was quite quiet, and light filtered through the roof. In a distant corner of the corridor, it was beginning to grow dark. The janitor came out and said, "Come this way." Nikolka went in, followed by Irina. He took off his cap. Looking around the huge room, he was struck first of all by the black stains on the glistening curtains and the patch of intensely bright light falling onto the table, illuminating a black beard, a haggard, wrinkled face, and a hooked nose. Finding all this depressing, he looked round at the walls. Endless rows of shelves gleamed in the semi-gloom, and he could just make out monstrous-looking objects, dark and yellow, like fearsome Chinese. A little farther off he saw a tall man in a priest-like leather apron and black gloves. He was bending down over a long table, on which stood a row of microscopes, like cannon, their mirrors gleaming white and gold in the light of a low lamp under a green shade. "What do you want?" asked the professor. Nikolka realized that the man with the beard and the haggard face must be the professor, and that the other, smaller man in the leather apron was an assistant. Nikolka coughed, his eyes fixed on the brilliant patch of light emanating from the strangely curved lamp, on the tobacco-stained fingers, and on the terrible, revolting-looking object lying in front of the professor. Someone's neck and chin, consisting of veins and tendons, pierced and threaded through with scores of gleaming hooks and scissors.
"Are you relatives?" asked the professor.
His voice sounded dull and muffled, a voice that corresponded to his lined face and his beard. He looked up and peered at Irina Nye and at her fur coat and boots. "I'm his sister," she replied, trying not to look at the object lying in front of the professor.
"You see, Sergei Nikolaevich, how difficult this all is. This isn't the first time. Anyway, it's possible he's not here anymore. Have the bodies been taken to the general mortuary?" "Possibly," the tall man replied, tossing an instrument to one side. "Fyodor!" shouted the professor.
"No, you go that way. You mustn't come this way. I'll go myself," Nikolka said shyly.
"It's not really for you, miss," the janitor agreed. "Why don't you wait here?" he added.
Nikolka took the janitor to one side, gave him 2 more banknotes, and asked him to find her a clean chair to sit on. The janitor, puffing away at his pipe with its homemade tobacco, produced a chair from a small room with a green lamp and some skeletons.
"You're not a doctor, are you, sir? Doctors get used to all this straight away,"
said the janitor, opening a large door and switching on a light on the glass ceiling. There was a strong smell in the room, containing row upon row of gleaming zinc tables. They were empty. Somewhere a tap was dripping into a sink. The stone floor rang under their feet. Finding it difficult to cope with the smell that no doubt must have always pervaded the room, Nikolka walked along, trying to keep his mind a blank. He followed the janitor through the doors at the other end, into a totally dark corridor. Here the janitor lit a small lamp, and they went on a little farther. The janitor threw back a heavy bolt, opened a metal door, and again flicked a switch. In the corners of the room stood huge cylinders, reaching up towards the ceiling and bulging with lumps and pieces of human flesh, strips of skin, fingers, and fragments of shattered bones. Nikolka swallowed hard and averted his eyes.
"Take a sniff of this, sir," said the janitor.
Nikolka closed his eyes and eagerly inhaled a lungful of unbearably strong sal ammoniac from a bottle. As if half asleep and screwing up his eyes, Nikolka was aware of Fyodor's glowing pipe and the sweet smell of cheap tobacco. After fiddling for a long time with the lock of the lift door, Fyodor managed to open it, and they took their places on the lift platform. Fyodor pulled a handle, and the lift started to descend, creaking as it went. Down below they were met by a blast of icy cold air. The lift came to a halt. They went into a huge mortuary. Nikolka could dimly make out something that he had never seen before in his life. Row upon row of naked human corpses, lying one next to the other like stacks of wood, emitting an unbearable stench in spite of the sal ammoniac. Particularly noticeable were the protruding soles of their feet, some rigid, some flopping sideways. The hair on women's heads was fluffed up and dishevelled, and their breasts were crushed, creased and bruised.
"I'll turn them over now, and you'll be able to see,"
the janitor said, bending over the first corpse. He grabbed hold of a woman's foot, and she flopped onto the floor as if on oil. She seemed horribly beautiful to Nikolka, lying there glistening like a witch. Her eyes were wide open, and she seemed to be looking straight at Fyodor. Nikolka managed only with some difficulty to take his eyes away from the scar encircling her body like a red ribbon, and to look elsewhere. He felt quite sick, and his head spun at the thought they would have to be turning over all these sticky, slippery bodies. "Wait, there's no need to go on," he said feebly to Fyodor, putting the bottle of sal ammoniac in his pocket. "There he is. I've found him. Up there. There." Balancing carefully so as not to slip onto the floor, Fyodor immediately climbed up, grabbed Naitur's by the head, and gave it a sharp tug. A flat-chested, broad-hipped woman lay on Nye's stomach, a cheap little comb on the back of her hair gleaming dully like a fragment of broken glass. In a single easy movement, Fyodor pulled the comb out and dropped it into the pocket of his apron. Then he gripped Nye under the arms and pulled him out from the general pile. Nye's head lolled back, his sharp, unshaven chin pointing upwards, and one hand flopped down towards the ground. Fyodor didn't drop Nye casually onto the ground as he had the woman, but, holding him under his arms and bending his now slack body, turned him to face Nikolka, his feet touching the floor. "Take a good look," he said. "Is this the one? We don't want to make a mistake." Nikolka looked Nye straight in the eyes. Nye's wide-open eyes looked back at Nikolka with a glassy, uncomprehending stare. On his left cheek there was a barely perceptible touch of green, and there were large stains, probably of congealed blood, marking his chest and stomach. "Yes, it's him," said Nikolka. Continuing to hold Nye under the arms, Fyodor dragged him onto the lift platform and laid him down at Nikolka's feet. The corpse lay there, its arms flung out wide and its chin pointing upwards. Fyodor got onto the lift, pulled the lever, and they started to move back up. That evening in the chapel, all Nikolka's wishes were fulfilled, and although he still felt unbearably sad, his conscience was completely calm. The light was turned on in the bare, gloomy chapel attached to the anatomical theatre. In the corner of the room, the lid had been placed on the coffin of some unknown person, so that such an unpleasant neighbour should not disturb Nye's peace and calm. It even seemed that Nye himself started to look out at the world from his coffin with a more cheerful expression. Nye's body had been washed by the good-humoured and talkative attendants. He was now clean and wearing his army coat without epaulets, with a wreath on his brow and with 3 candles at the head of his coffin, and, most importantly of all, with his colourful ribbon of St. George, which Nikolka had himself placed onto his cold and clammy chest under his shirt. Seeing the 3 candles, Nye's old mother turned her trembling head towards Nikolka and said, "That is my son. Thank you." When he heard this, Nikolka burst into tears again and went out of the chapel into the snow. All around him, above the yard of the anatomical theatre, lay the night and the snow, and overhead the Milky Way and the stars, like crosses.